Okay, so good evening, everyone. For most of you, it's good evening, but I think for some people, they are in different time zone maybe. But I'm really humbled. I can see around 25 people already have joined, and I'm hoping few more will come. So anyhow, so the idea of hosting a discussion like this, like I and Moin Bhai have been discussing about this for, I won't say long time, but at least for a few weeks actually. And in last 10 days or so, as the things developed so rapidly in Afghanistan, so many of our friends and acquaintances on social media or different platforms requested us to maybe have some kind of a discussion like this, more like a primer on what is happening in Afghanistan. So this is the first session which we are holding, and hopefully uh, if let's see how the response is, and then if need be in subsequent session we can have maybe more of like say we can invite guests from particularly Afghans or from Afghanistan, but I don't know how the situation will be, but at least Afghans who are maybe studying or working somewhere, journalists or researchers anywhere in the world. So that was the idea. Honestly, I can see that most people are like, I know somehow, colleagues, teachers, students, friends. So honestly, I have not prepared any, say, paper, so to say, or even a speech, something to deliver. uh, the idea was just to like there are people here from almost all kinds of backgrounds, students, activists, journalists, from different background. Not all of them are from say political science or international studies background, but somehow we all on social media get to see the visuals from Afghanistan and have different notions about Afghanistan. Now I said that I was discussing with Moin Bhai about hosting something like this, and the idea came because on social media in particular, I see very uh, uh, I see very just a second, one person has messaged that it's a wrong ID. Let me just forward. Okay, sorry. So uh, the idea came because on social media I was saying that I see very contrast and very extreme views on Afghanistan. So, for example, the government in Kabul was a puppet regime, uh, and so it should go. That's the inference. So, if that is so, almost every other government in the world should go, probably except America. Okay, because to some degree, almost every second government, especially in the region we are talking about, are somehow puppet of one world power or the other. I'm not saying puppet exactly in like in a very generic sense. Similarly about Taliban, the views about how Taliban is uh, anti-imperialist force for some. For some it may be like they are someone who will bringing justice and khilafa, so to say. So these are the kind of views which I have been seeing a lot on social media, and that's why as someone who have, I won't say I'm a scholar of Afghanistan, but I have been closely observing Afghanistan for quite almost a decade now. So I thought let's have a sort of primer on Afghanistan. Now, as I said, I have not prepared anything. If I go into history, one can start from uh, like there is one reason why India, like Afghanistan is important for India, not just for say geostrategic regions, even otherwise. For let's imagine like till 1947, till the night of 14th August 1947, India and Afghanistan were actually neighbors, right? Our borders were till Durand line, India's border, British India's border, and so Afghans were neighbors. And this was not like only during British time, but all through history. Afghanistan, what is today, this was and India were neighbors actually. In fact, Kabul, for most of the Mughal period, was part of, and for some time even Kandahar have been part of Mughal India. Okay, so almost a large part of, and of course, all these Afghan Pashtun regions of Pakistan were part of the Mughal India. So it was like one country, you can say. That's how close we are. Uh, Of course, we also have our own Pashtun or Pathan population in India, Yusufzai and several other tribes. Now, so that's in history. Okay, the if we talk just about the problem of Afghanistan or what is happening in, trying to give you a background to understand the problem. Okay, so Afghanistan historically, and that's how actually most of the world was for a long time. Okay, it's not just something very unique to Afghanistan. Or in earlier times, till Middle Ages, we didn't have the kind of communication we have today. We didn't have mobile and telephones. We didn't have trains or flights, things like that. So most of these empires, by nature, were supposed to be very decentralized. So you had these local chieftains, whatever you call it, beg, zamindar, mansabdar, or in today's term, these warlords, and they were supposed to pay taxes and pay allegiance to the king or whoever was the ruler, and that's it. Okay, in local affairs, for most of the things, the local ruler had the autonomy to manage affairs. Okay, now why am I mentioning about this if it was everywhere in the world? Because for Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was a monarchy till 1960s, this is how the things were. Okay, and this is how, to a large degree, things are even today. Okay, Afghanistan has largely remained a decentralized state. Okay, where center or the capital didn't have lot of control on the rest of the land, especially in rural area. Now, why I'm emphasizing on this is because before the beginning of August, we often heard about how Taliban has control over this much of land and how government is only limited to urban areas. Okay, because that's how always Afghanistan has been in many ways. Okay, that's one thing. Now, the second thing is, there were only few times when actually rulers in Afghanistan tried to have a centralized system. And there was this one famous king, King Abdur Rahman Khan, who is called the Iron King, because he was the one who tried to centralize whole of Afghanistan and control whole of Afghanistan. He was the one who was actually also responsible for massacres of Hazara community, who are Mongoloid Muslims and follow Shia sect of Islam. Okay, so and the problem there were problems when he tried to do it. He could somehow manage because he was the Iron King and he had the support of the British, but problems begin soon after. Okay, now the second time someone tried to do it to some degree was King Amanullah Khan. Now I'm not going, of course, detail in the all the rulers, but King Amanullah Khan is very important for us when we are talking today, because somehow the things which started during King Amanullah Khan, whatever is happening today is like chain reaction of those. Okay, so King Amanullah Khan, I don't know how many of you who are not familiar with Afghanistan maybe might not have heard his name. He was the king in the around 1915, 20, around that time he was the ruler. Okay, and he was the one who I mean the first quarter of the 20th century. And the third, I'm sure all of you know about Anglo-Afghan War. So the first, second Anglo-Afghan War, the third Anglo-Afghan War happened during his time. It was he who declared the war, fought against the British, which was British India, by the way. So see how India and Afghanistan is related. So British India, British India, he fought against British India and became independent on basically a treaty was signed on 19 August. So 19 August is celebrated in Afghanistan as their Independence Day. Okay. Now, earlier he was declared a Ghazi, as or someone who went on jihad and won it, came alive, who was not Shaheed, who didn't become a martyr, who became a Ghazi. Okay, when you go in a quote unquote religious war and you you win the battle, then you are declared a Ghazi. People who are watching Ertugrul and all those Turkish series might be familiar with these things. So he became a Ghazi first, but then he was so confident about his, like he consolidated his empire reasonably. Okay, now this was the time when you must have heard about Young Turk movement and similar such so-called modernization drive happening around the Muslim countries, like in different Muslim countries. Okay, so he also started similar. So what happened actually, there is another side story to this. So he was so confident, in history that kings rarely leave their empire, because when they go on when they go outside, what happens is one of your cousins or one of your generals will usurp power. He or he will become the king and overthrow you. Okay, but he became so confident about consolidation of his empire that he went to a long tour to Turkey and these Arab countries, and then to Europe, and came after, like he went on a long sojourn of sort. Okay, now he was very impressed with A, Turkey, Istanbul of that time, and B, of Europe, France and other European countries. So when he came back inspired, he started what is called the modernization drive. Okay, and that's when, and part of the modernization drive he also did was he tried to centralize power in his hand. Okay, and so the local, now Afghanistan is historically have been one thing people who are from political science background would understand: the state as we understand today, okay, India, Pakistan, the fixed border with the sovereignty, this kind of a state never existed in history earlier. We had empires, right? This is a very 17th century concept. It is called Westphalian system of a state, Westphalian states we call it. Okay, where you need to have the sovereignty like this. Nationalism became very important increasingly, like love for the nation, Bharat Mata ke liye marna hai, and all those stuff. Pehle you would see that like say Tipu Sultan army was being trained by French. Maharaja Ranjit Singh army was being trained by similarly French generals. And in European history, we know that how there were these mercenaries who would fight for either side, who paid them money. Okay, there was no concept of nations, so to say. You didn't attach yourself to say a motherland, so to say, to a nation. So that concept was not there. Now, why am I again mentioning about this is, often when we talk, so this nation concept in post-colonial countries, the countries which were colonized either by British or French or Russians, this concept somehow is ingrained in us. We in India think, okay, this is India, this is Pakistan, this is Uzbekistan, right? And I'm an Indian, I'm an Uzbek or whatever. Now the countries which were not directly under any such so-called modern colonial powers, they didn't have this concept. Okay, now so in Afghanistan, this concept of nationalism is not really that strong. That's very important to understand when we see why these people change sides. Okay, this has been talk of the town, how so quickly people change sides. Okay, this is not first time in history. Okay, I can give you one instance when during the time of Mahmud Ghaznavi, when Mongols invaded Balkh, which is now Mazar-e-Sharif is the capital of that province. So the soldiers, there were not enough soldiers at that time. So the people of the town stood up against the Mongols. Now, people of the town means traders, artisans, common people, right? Maybe students. They were not trained to fight, that too against a mighty army like Mongols. So what happened? There were massacres. Okay. Now, when the king hears about it, if it was today's time, they would be declared martyrs and whatnot, right? But Ghaznavi actually got angry when he got to know this. He said it was the fight between two kings. Why did these common people had to intervene? Okay, you could just pay homage to whoever was there in power. So you understand how, like, for these people who have tribal affinities, or who have their own ethnic or regional associations around communities, they focus more on, so they will think more about these interests, their own interest, than say interest of the what we know as a nation, right? So that was not there. So this, if you this will help you understand why it was once US forces withdrew, the withdrawal, the change and the control of Taliban was so swift. Now, even again, I can mention about history. When we study history, okay, so when we studied that Mughal started from here, and then there are some major places where we hear about battles, okay, and then but say Mughal started from what is now Uzbekistan, Andijan, okay. There is a series which is going to come up soon, so maybe you can watch it. And then from there, the first place he conquered really was Balkh, and then Kabul, and then we hear about Battle of Panipat. Okay, we don't hear about lot of battles. So from Kabul to Panipat, there is this whole new country now of present time, Pakistan. So there were some battles. I'm not saying no battle happened, but most of these battles were like there were few small battles, non-significant battles, so to say. But otherwise, the change was similar. Something similar would happen often. You would have deals, you have local groups, local chieftains coming and changing side for their own interest, because they didn't see any gain out of such battles. Okay, so that was another thing which was happening. Now, when we talk about these things are often in Western narrative, where state becomes and sovereignty is important. We see these things as very pre-modern things. Okay, so I'm not going into that debate of modernity, what is modernity and pre-modernity, because this is something which is there, okay, whether we like it or not. I'm not saying these are pre-modern things, but I'm saying this is something, these traditions have been there. Okay, so all of us, for example, are very familiar with something called panchayat, right? Or something like you have, what is it called, the caste panchayats that we have. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the word.
Khap.
Khap, yes, sorry, yes, thanks, Shadab. So the Khap panchayats, okay. So something like this is more like a Mongol culture, okay. Even in Mongols they had this culture, and all these earlier societies had. So for example, Mongols call it kurtule, okay. And similarly, in countries like Afghanistan, it is called zirga and loya zirga, okay. Loya zirga is kind of so in present Afghanistan, Loya Zirga is in many ways the highest authority, like where chiefs of all these tribal chiefs will assemble and decide, and all the kings in history, whoever become king, symbolically they would call Loya Zirga for legitimization. Now, it's not that it's a perfect system of democracy, I'm saying, okay, but Loya Zirga has some sort of legitimacy within society. So whether it was whichever king you say, Ahmad Shah Durrani, or later King Amanullah Khan, or any other king, whoever becomes kings or rulers, they would call a Loya Zirga, and of course they would try to manipulate them to their advantage in a way that it would suit, like they would approve of their appointment as the ruler or the king. Okay, this they did, as I told you, because of the larger legitimacy. Now, in a country which is now Afghanistan, as I told you, Kabul and all was part of actually Mughal Empire. So the country that we now call Afghanistan is by and large the empire of Ahmad Shah Durrani. Like not exact, Ahmad Shah Durrani at one time had empire. Durranis had their border still Kashmir and large part of what is now Punjab also. But whatever is left. So it was first the king I mentioned earlier, King Abdul Rahman Khan, who kind of tried to consolidate the empire, and later Ahmad Shah Durrani, or Ahmad Shah Abdali as we know him, okay, he's the one who conquered these places, and this is what is today. So that is why Ahmad Shah Durrani is known in Afghan history as they call him Ahmad Shah Baba, or the father of the nation. Okay, so Ahmad Shah Durrani. So the few kings who become very important in Afghan history at the moment is one, Ahmad Shah Durrani, of course, and the second is whose name I mentioned earlier, King Amanullah Khan. He became very famous. In fact, when I was there for my field work during 2019, I would see on cars two posters in many cars of especially Pashtuns. Okay, one was King Amanullah Khan, and second was often with his wife and Queen Suraya, and the second was President Najib. Now I'll come to Najib later, but shortly it was Durrani Empire, Ahmad Shah Durrani who ruled, and then later Barakzais started ruling. Okay, and till 1960s it was quite stable. Okay, so on social media you must have seen many of these photographs. So I told you it was during the time of Amanullah Khan that Afghanistan actually became independent, okay, quote unquote independent, from the British influence. Okay, but in 1947 anyway, British goes from South Asia, and that's when Pakistan is created. Okay, now till, as I said, till 47 India and Afghanistan bordered each other. Okay, but now 47 suddenly a new country comes up. Okay, and that country is called Pakistan. I don't know how many of you know about this. When they were voting for Pakistan in the United Nations, there was just one country which voted against Pakistan, and that was Afghanistan. Okay, and they voted against it because the UN, there's this clause that, like, if you have some border disputes, then I'm saying in very layman's language, so if you have some border disputes, then like they won't, that new country won't be recognized. Okay, and Afghanistan under King Zahir Shah at that time raised the issue of the Durand line, because see, now what is Durand line? Durand line is kind of a porous border between India, what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now during British, they were, we all know about our border disputes with China, right? That's because McMahon line was drawn without asking Indians, right? Whatever border existed. So because of the McMahon line, we have issues with China and some border dispute also with Nepal and primarily with China. Okay, because India earlier had claims on other areas, and similarly China have their own claims on some areas. Okay, so similar to McMahon line, after this Anglo-Afghan war, this Durand line was drawn. Primarily Durand line, this drawing of Durand line has another significance. So Russians, by now Soviet, okay, they had conquered till what you say, till Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Okay, that became part of US of the Russian Empire earlier, and then USSR. And so British Empire felt threatened that Russia wants to reach the sea. Okay, by sea they meant the Arabian Sea, of course, and so that actually, now that was the panic first happened during King Abdul Rahman Khan time. By the way, aside, all of us talk about how Bamiyan, a statue, was dynamited by the Taliban. It was British who dynamited the famous mosque. It was not just one mosque. It was like a kind of there were mosque and madrasas, several madrasas in Herat, on the what is present outskirt of Herat. Okay, built by Gohar Shah Begum, the Timurid queen, which was dynamited by British. Okay, the mosques were there and madrasa were there, which was dynamited by British because they thought that the Russian soldiers who will come, they may hide within those in that citadel. So to clear the view, the whole mosque campus compound was actually dynamited. Anyhow, so coming back to, so it was more of what we later came to know as the Cold War. So it was not actually a Cold War, it was a hard war going between the Russian Empire and the British. And that's when the World War, in Europe, when World War began. So British and Russians thought it's not a good time to fight in Asia, between ourselves. So they signed a treaty, and part of which this line was drawn, and Afghanistan became kind of a buffer state. Okay, so till Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, that was the border of the USSR, until what is now Durand line would be part of the British Empire, and in between Afghanistan became a kind of a buffer state. Now that was for good reason. That became a kind of, Afghanistan at that time became a kind of a Switzerland in South Asia. That was a brief period when actually there were a lot of politics between all these powers going on, no doubt, but by and large Afghanistan at that time was quite peaceful. Okay, reasonably peaceful in fact. And there was some of this progress which were happening, very slow, because it was not a very rich country, and the king was there, so they were traditional in many ways, but many of these changes were actually happening. Okay, so that was earlier anyway. But once this King Amanullah Khan declared Afghanistan independence, and 47, I told you that when Pakistan was created, Afghanistan was the only country which voted against Pakistan in the United Nations. And you would be surprised that in the first few decades, okay, of not so much during Zahir Shah time, but especially during his cousin, who became later the those of you who don't know the history of Afghanistan, so King Zahir Shah was there, he was the king, and his cousin Sardar Dost Muhammad Khan was prime minister briefly. Later he was the one who had there was a palace coup. Okay, and Zahir Shah was exiled, and Dost Muhammad Khan declared himself not as a king, but declared himself a president. Okay, now that's
I'm sorry, I guess that's Daud Khan.
Sorry, Daud Khan. Okay, not Dost Muhammad Khan, Daud M. So Daud Khan declared himself the president. Okay, and so I told you that the chain of what King Amanullah Khan did once, and earlier what Abdur Rahman Khan did, the chain of reaction continues. So this was another important event. Okay, so the many of the problems which we are seeing today, again a very significant this moment was when Daud Khan declared himself, Sardar Daud Khan declared himself the president. Okay, because so far, see, Afghanistan was a monarchy. Now for the first time it became a republic. Okay, he declared it a republic and himself became a president. But now some of his own supporters, okay, later again had there was another round of coup, and he was actually, his entire family was actually executed, and then the communist regime was declared, and in succession there were three major communist rulers. Okay, now this was kind of again another round of Cold War which was happening now. Earlier also I told you it was between British and Russians. There were these kind of battles and tussles which was going on, but finally, because the World War had begun in Europe, so they declared Afghanistan as a buffer state. Now after the Second World War, there was no, like, British power was not so important, but the role Britain played in the international politics was somehow taken over by USA, that we all know, right? So now during the Cold War, it was now the Soviets. Okay, earlier it was the Russian Empire and the British Empire. Now it's the USSR and the USA. Okay, and the USA, as we all know, during the Cold War, they were the champions of liberalism and democracy on one side, the first world, and the second world was the USSR and their countries who had socialist or communist regime, and USSR saw themselves as the protector of these regimes. And there have been these battles in several other countries. Okay, Korea, Vietnam, in South America there were issues in some of these African countries, but one major event of the Cold War, which actually ended the Cold War of that period, in the sense that led to the disintegration of the USSR, is when when is the Afghanistan event. And what happened, very briefly, again, I'm not going into details. I've almost spoken for more than like 20 minutes. So in next 10 minutes, I'll try to wrap up. But what I'm saying is, so Soviets intervened in, so pro-Soviet, or what we are now calling the puppet regime of USA. So similarly, these puppet presidents of communist presidents were installed in Afghanistan. Okay. And again, I'm not going into details of each president, but there were problems within that system also. There were problems based on tribal division. There were other problems. But in short, when USSR saw that they are not able to, their regime are not able to manage. And why were they not able to manage? Because see, Afghanistan, I told you, was largely a traditional society. During King Amanullah Khan also, when he had tried to modernize Afghanistan, there were these kind of a pushback from the society. Tribal leaders and religious leaders had kind of collaborated against King Amanullah Khan and drove him out. Okay. And now similar thing was happening when Soviet took over. Okay, when these communist regimes was installed, and there were so within the resistance which came up, there were the two strands. One was traditional Maulanas, and some of them were also, of course, they all came from some tribe or the other, of course. And there was another group who were like political Islam, what we know as Islamist. Okay. And the Kabul University became the hub of anti-communist movement. Okay. So I'm sure all of you have heard the name of Ustad Sayaf. Okay. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. And all these important jihadi leaders, okay, were either students or teachers in Kabul University or other such institutions. Okay. And Kabul University and these leaders, so there were different factions. Now this anti-communist resistance was not again a unified movement. Okay, there were different factions. Everyone had their own party. Okay, but there were, like, say, Ustad Rabbani was there, who later became president. Hekmatyar was there. Ahmad Shah Massoud was there, okay, who was Tajik again. So in Afghanistan, we didn't have census for last few decades, okay, but of the data which is available, Pashtuns are in majority. Now, when we say Pashtuns, okay, as if they are very monolithic community, which is not. They are divided again into different tribes and sub tribes. Okay, there are mainly Durranis and Ghilzais, and within Durrani and Ghilzai again you have so many sub tribes. Okay, and then there are the largest minorities are Tajik, and then there are Uzbeks, there are Turkmens, there are Hazaras, and most of them are Sunnis, but most of the Hazaras are actually Shias. So these are ethnically divided communities. The country is divided on these ethnic lines, and not just ethnic, regional, provincial. So a lot of these kind of differences are there. Now, historically, provinces bordering what is now Pakistan and Iran, these provinces, so east and south and southeast, of course, this was the region which was Pashtun dominated historically. And there, by the way, there are more Pashtuns in Pakistan, by the way, than say they are in Afghanistan. The Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, what was earlier Northwest Frontier Province, and Fatah. And of course there are some also in Balochistan. So they are all the bordering provinces, and together it was, many people say, Pashtun land, or there are these kind of concepts, but this Pashtun land was actually divided, as I told you, by Durand line. Okay, now during especially Sardar Daud Khan period, there were these kind of movements to to have one Pashtun land of Sir, or there was this demand to have the what is on the other side of the Durand line as part of Afghanistan. I told you that the Afghans voted against Pakistan in the United Nations because they said that we didn't, the Durand line, now British is gone, the tenure of Durand line was supposed to be 100 years. So once the tenure that expires, the Durand, the areas on the other side of the Durand line, on the east of the Durand line, which is present Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, should actually become part of the Afghanistan. And there were these kind of movements going on, campaigns for to unite this Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with Afghanistan. Okay, and especially these kind of movements were supported. Like there are evidence that even the Kabul government supported it, maybe not always publicly. Okay, but there were these kind of movements. Now I mentioned about this because you can see the contrast, just the opposite happened. Now how the opposite happened, there is reason to this. I told you that by now Soviets had entered in Afghanistan, and there were these resistance forces who now when their prosecution started, okay, thousands of these anti-communist government leaders and cadres were arrested, executed. There have been mass prisons. Even now, like we don't know for certain how many people died actually. Okay, there were a lot of persecutions of in the hands of the Soviets and their puppet regime, persecutions of the resistance forces, okay, who comprised primarily of, I told you there were two strands, one who were educated in the madrasa and the others who were educated in the university. Okay, but both these had the common cause of sort. Okay, in many ways they came together. Largely, broadly, they had this agreement to fight against the communist regime, the infidel regime, so to say. Okay, and because Pakistan borders them, so most of these leaders found refuge in what is Pakistan. Okay, especially in these Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and these regions. Okay, so these leaders, the so-called jihadi leaders, they sought refuge. Okay, in Pakistan, and that's where Pakistan got an opportunity to end the old this demand for Pashtun land, and also to directly intervene in Pakistan in the affairs of the Afghan politics. Now, because it was the Cold War period, the resistance was, what I'm telling you is, the resistance was there. It was not as if it was instigated by the CIA. Okay, the resistance was there. People were fighting. There were a lot of persecutions, and that's when CIA enters. Okay, because it was Cold War period, so America enters and all these countries enters, because this battle was made about fight against the infidels. Okay, and so it is well documented that Saudi Arabia and UAE primarily and other Gulf countries, they sort of sponsored this so-called global jihad. Okay, and USA, CIA was there, the kind of mastermind, and the executing agency was ISI. So that's, and it is well documented, and no one shied about it. They did it very proudly. There are these documented stories of how people were encouraged from even Western countries, okay, Muslims, to go and do jihad in Afghanistan. Okay, they were regarded, so the word at that time was used was mujahideen. Okay, so mujahideen or jihad, so jihad, now there is this distinction. Earlier mujahideen and jihadi was used synonymously, but post 9/11 mujahideen were those good old days jihadi leaders in Afghanistan. If you read Tolo News or if you read any papers of Afghanistan, they use these words interchangeably. But for international media, mujahideen were those good old jihadis who fought against the Soviets. And all these leaders whom you see, who later became warlords, Ustad Sayaf, Ustad Sayaf, Ustad Rabbani, Ahmad Shah Massoud, Jilani, Mazari, there were so many leaders. Okay, even Haqqanis and Hikmatyar, they all were actually fighting against the infidel communists, so to say. But once, like the way USA has run now, and people are surprised as if this is the first time it is happening. It has happened in the past also. Similarly, Soviet also ran away. But before they ran away, what they had done was, President Najib was there, and President Najib tried to, so somehow they were still supported by Soviets, but not as much as they were earlier involved. Okay, but so President Najib could hold on. So 89, I think, if I'm not wrong, Soviet withdrew. Okay, but end of 91 is when USSR disintegrated. Okay, and they disintegrated because Afghan war was a huge reason, because they spent a lot of money, and the war had become sort of liability for them, and that is why they had to withdraw embarrassingly. Okay, and USA thought that they have won the battle against the Soviets. Okay, they declared it as the end of history and whatnot, and they withdrew immediately. US ended as if their work is done, like they are no more needed in Afghanistan. They left Afghanistan at the mercy of the Pakistan, just as today US has done. Okay, and that's when what happened was, all these warlords, so from 89 to 90, end of 91, 92, when USSR was there, President Najib was still getting some support from, I mean, monetary support, financial support from the USSR, and so he could still hold on. Okay, he had his own militias and all. President Najib was also no saint, so to say, by the way, but he tried to form an inclusive government. So in Afghanistan today, I told you President Najib photo is found because this period, the last 2 to 3 years of his presidency, he actually tried very hard to form an inclusive government, the similar kind of attempt which is to some degree is being taken now, because they don't want to repeat the same mistake. So he tried to hold the election and form an inclusive government, but he even finally had to resign, and the coalition government took over. Okay, but this coalition government, like all these famous so-called mujahideen or jihadi leaders, they all came from there, like they all had some region. Okay, Rabbani came from Badakhshan, Ahmad Shah Massoud was from Panjshir, Mazari was of course from Bamiyan. So there were these leaders from different regions who represented different tribes or different ethnicities. Okay, and there were a lot of their internal conflicts within them. They couldn't decide on who will be president, who will be prime minister. Of course, they announced, and they were like, but there were too many president and prime minister within a very short span of time. And again, I'm not going into details of those. But what happened in short was civil war ensued once the Russians left, and the USA had also left. Okay, so the civil war ensued. And there was chaos during the Soviet war. The Soviet war mostly happened in rural area or in some of these provinces. Kabul was not destroyed by Soviets. Kabul was primarily destroyed during 90s, for the first few years of 90s, when these warlords fought among themselves. So certain area of Kabul was under Hikmatyar, and certain area of Kabul was under Ahmad Shah Massoud, and similarly other these warlords, and they fought among themselves, firing bullets at one another, bombing at night, and all those kind of things. Now, from this chaos is where Taliban emerged. Okay, from this chaos, Taliban emerged, and Moin Bhai will talk in detail on this, and I can see that Samir Bhai has also joined, so maybe he can also intervene later. So I'm not going to details of what happened, but in short, Taliban came to the power, and you all know about Bamiyan, and then 9/11 happened, and after 9/11, US intervened once again. You can call it invasion. US invaded Afghanistan to drive Taliban out, because now USA didn't have any reservation as such with Taliban. They were negotiating with Taliban earlier to recognize them, to have some kind of deals with them and all those stuff. But when 9/11 happened, then it became difficult for USA also to actually recognize Taliban, because Taliban didn't want to give Osama bin Laden. And so the invasion happened, and after the invasion, we all know that the so-called puppet regime was installed. So, but which was not, it didn't happen just like that. There was Bonn conference where all these major leaders. Now, again, I'm mentioning about this because what happened in the Bonn conference, Bonn is those of you who don't know, is a city in Germany where this huge conference happened, where all these international stakeholders were there, and all the major leaders, politicians of Afghanistan were there, except those who were part of the Taliban. Now, why I'm mentioning about this? Because now people are trying to have a kind of inclusive government. If America was not so arrogant at that time, they could have invited the senior Taliban leaders, okay, these Haqqanis, Hekmatyar, Mullah Omar, maybe others, their representatives, and had a kind of an inclusive government, because anyway they didn't have much problem with Taliban earlier, okay, and they could have an inclusive government, but which they didn't. And the kind of government, now why this government failed so suddenly, there are many reasons, okay. The one reason which I see is the kind of system which was installed was not Afghans to say, okay. This was like a more, even USA does not have this kind of a system, okay. US is not a centralized republic. US in US elections happen in each of these provinces. There is USA is a federal system, okay. But what they did with Afghanistan is they installed a very centralized government, okay. Earlier there were talks of having a parliamentary system of government where there will be prime minister, and earlier there was even talk of King Zahir Shah was still alive. So he was brought back, in fact, as an interim president of sort, okay. So they were talk of having something like a constitutional monarchy like Britain, okay, where the king will be there, and then there will be election for the federal government. So why these things are important? Because now again I'm going back to that nation or nationalism is not so strong in Afghanistan, okay. And that is why one of the major project of, so President Joe Biden is lying when he says we didn't go there to build a state or for the nation building. One of the major project of Afghanistan was nation building, okay. They invested a lot of money, in billions of dollars, in fact, in what is called quote unquote nation building, okay. But they failed miserably because I wrote an article a few days ago where I briefly mentioned about it. They didn't know Afghan society, okay. Even though this Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the ambassador at that time, is himself an Afghan, okay, as in he's born in Afghanistan, of course. He's born in Afghanistan, and during the civil war his family had migrated, but he's an American diplomat. And the next person, the bad guy, who he was supposed to be the one who would solve the problem of Afghanistan, okay. He was sent by World Bank, installed by World Bank, supported by the US government. He is the author who actually studied in detail how to fix a failed state, okay. He has written a book on this and several other research articles. But somehow President Ashraf Ghani was now Ghani and Karzai, there are contrast in many ways, okay. Karzai comes from he's like a son of the soil. He knows his country like the back of his hand. He knows how to negotiate with these tribal leaders, how to please them. So many of these leaders who come from villages, all they need from you is expect from you is how well you talk to them, how well you respect them, okay, and they would be very happy from you. And Karzai spent a lot of time in all these things, which many people thought he's just wasting his time. But Ghani thought he is like a technocrat. He has come from US, these rural people. So I feel that one of the reasons why peace negotiation failed was because there was a lot of arrogance on both sides. Very honestly, both sides. Even Taliban leaders, they have become, they are like war hardened people. For more than 30 years they are fighting, okay, 30-40 years they have been fighting. So they are war-hardened people. They have learned the diplomacy, the tricks of diplomacy, but they are still very adamant and very rigid in their belief system, okay. On the other side, even these Afghan, the elites of Afghan, the elites represent Kabul elite, if I can say, they were also very arrogant. They think that these these Taliban, they are like rural people, proxies of ISI. They are not civilized. In fact, they are savage, they are barbarians, and all those kind of words were used for them. Of course, not in these meetings, but in public domain. So that arrogance was reflected clearly. Neither Ghani administration nor Taliban were ready to have a compromise, okay, and that was one main reason why this failed, okay, this negotiation failed. But I somehow blame President Ghani more, because he was the one who was in power, and as a president he should have taken initiative for the transition. You knew when US signed the deal with Taliban, everyone knew that Taliban will come to power. My friends for last 1-2 years, they have been asking, will Taliban ever come to power in Kabul? And I used to tell them, I never said this publicly, but I used to tell them privately, if Taliban wants to come wants to capture Kabul, they can do it any day. They are not doing it because they know they will not be able to manage it, because to run a parallel government is a different thing. To run a government, actually Taliban knows how they miserably failed in 90s, because they didn't have technocrats, they didn't have these consultant financial officers, they didn't have economists to run the economy. So they are, when it comes to fighting, no one can really defeat them in a way, because they are born in war. But when it comes to actually managing the state, Taliban knows their limitation, and that is the reason why they are so open to talk with all these stakeholders and try to have a more inclusive government. Another reason, of course, being that they want international recognition. They don't want to become a pariah state like last time, and that is why they are talking. I think I will stop here. I have spoken for almost like 40-45 minutes, and maybe we'll take some questions at the end, but maybe I didn't go much into details of Taliban, because Moin Bhai has actually, for those of you who don't know Moin Bhai, Moinuddin Ahmed is a PhD in international studies with a specialization on West Asia from Jamia, and he is the news editor with, presently he is news editor with India Times. And of course he keeps writing also, and very recently he wrote an article actually trying to understand, this was before, by the way, 15 August, okay, so he wrote an article trying to understand what Taliban is up to and what is their ideology, so it's very easy for us to say that they are barbarians, they are savage, they are terrorists, okay, whether there was this debate recently in India on whether they are terrorists or they are insurgents. So I will hold my thoughts on this. I think I've already spoken a lot. So I invite Moin Bhai, and I can see that Samir Bhai is there. So I will request him, maybe after Moin Bhai, if he can intervene, although I know you are not prepared, but you have been writing yourself too. So maybe if you can come in later. Moin Bhai, I'm muting myself now.
Thank you, Riaz. Thank you very much for organizing this. This is quite timely intervention by you, an academic, and a very serious academic, I would say. By now, I think most of our listeners have understood that how important it is to make friends if you want to rule Afghanistan. And that's what precisely Taliban are doing. I'm just, cutting from history to what has happened today. Taliban are talking to the brother of President Ghani. And yesterday they were in talks with the president of Ahmad Shah Massoud, which is clearly indicative of the fact that they don't really want to miss on the opportunity of taking every stakeholder on board whenever they will decide that they are forming a government. So while I was doing a bit of research for my article and I was talking to my Afghan friends and all, I got to know that definitely it was there in mind that Taliban is not a monolith, but nuances are there, and Taliban are definitely, they are made up of, you know, different Pashtun tribes. But now, if we look at their entire construct of, you know, a few days ago, Taliban was divided. Half of more than half of them were fighting in Afghanistan, and some of their, if you would like to consider it as intelligentsia, some of them were sitting in Qatar, and they were making policies, and you know, they are doing outreach to different governments and different you know, people who would eventually help them setting up a government. So the entire structure of the current Taliban is very diverse, and you know, it includes the most dominant Nurzai tribes and other Durrani tribes and Stanikzais, and one of the Stanikzais have studied in India as well. There were stories about him. So definitely they are like, they understand that it's important to take along every stakeholders if they really want to you know, rule the country or most part of the country, because in Panjshir and in 3 other districts today, they have had a setback. So now the, you know, the current situation is like Taliban seemingly have won Afghanistan, but the way, you know, it has unfolded, it has left more questions than the answers, and people are really on 15th August, people were left flabbergasted with the way things unfolded, because it was like a couple of days ago, it was the top US think tanks were telling that it would take 90 days to, you know, for Taliban to capture Kabul, and that too after September 11, once the entire US forces leave. But what happened, it didn't even take 90 hours, you know, to them to come and capture Kabul. So things unfolded very, very quickly in Afghanistan, and which, you know, makes one wonder that what is the role of the United States in this. The good thing is that we may get to know some years later, because United States, you know, makes it foreign policies paper public. But even now, people are, you know, people have a lot of questions that what possibly could have happened. Was there a deal? Definitely, there was a deal, because Mullah Biradar is a product of the deal. He was languishing in jail, and you know, it was the US that requested his release. So there was definitely a deal. Plus, at the same time, you know, what the other powers, China and Russia, were doing. They were actually quick to really assess the situation that Taliban would be there in power, and they understood that you know, it was important to really talk to them beforehand. Um, One of the important documents I came across was, you know, was assessing the reason why, you know, the Taliban, the Afghan forces lost the battles and eventually the war. So we know that they were not paid for months and all, and Taliban came and paid them, and you know, requested them for the sake of God probably to join them. But another technical, you know, beyond a theological reason, there was a technical reason that was given, is that the Americans were, you know, they trained the Afghan forces like them only, because the Americans are not in a habit of, you know, doing much ground offenses. They rely heavily on their Air Force, and once the Air Force destroys most of the part, then you know, the boots go on the floor. So the Afghan forces were also you know, trained on that pattern. And actually, when the Taliban onslaught began, so and mysteriously US decided to hold back their Air Force attacks. They did some even in the later part, but they significantly reduced them. So the Afghan forces found it difficult. One of the analysis that could be there. But definitely, yesterday I came across an article in The Atlantic. It was by Ian Furtz, the person who has served as Air Force officer for the US Force. And he was precisely given the job of listening to the talks of, Taliban. And he was trained in Dari and Pashto, and actually informing the Air Force beforehand that what their next move would be, so that they can actually attack the Taliban. It's quite a revelation, that article, and the writer himself, along with many of us, is wondering that what has kept Taliban in the good spirit. What has kept Taliban fighting? Is it their faith? Is it the amount of tremendous loss that they have faced over the years? Let us not forget that they were also, their families were also bound by the US, and which was actually not making as much news as the current assault by Taliban on other Afghans is making in the last 2-3 days. So I mean, comparisons can be made. I don't like to make comparisons, but definitely these are the narratives that would compete with each other in the coming days, looking at how Taliban have come all prepared to counter the propaganda that was there against them, and they are really, taking extremely necessary steps on the social media as well to stay relevant and to make their voices reach to the people. We don't know what is going to happen in the next few days and the next few months. It is going to be a long haul, common sense suggests. But Riaz, I mean, I would like to open the floor for questions. I think I really thank people who have come here. They deserve more time to ask their questions, and we can discuss probably what we have on a board. Thank you very much.
So I think Samir Bhai is not here at the moment. He logged out maybe. So before, just a second. So people who have questions, maybe you can just write in the chat box and we'll try to answer. And if someone really wants to say something relevant, important, you can message me separately. So I will allow you to speak. But since Moin Bhai didn't really touch on this, he is being Moin Bhai, too diplomatic. So let me tell a bit about, because that's one of the reasons why I'm organizing this, and I hope to do it in series. What I'm planning is I will invite more speakers mainly for this topic and to understand Afghanistan better, of course. Is the ideology of the Taliban, and more so what is Taliban, because this debate, especially in Indian media, it has been going on. Ghazala Wahab, I think, tweeted that they are insurgents, and then there was this whole lot of debate on this. Now, this is a bit theoretical, but then who are terrorists? If you read the books written by even Indian historians till say before 9/11, okay, in many of the books, people like Khudiram Bose and Bhagat Singh are mentioned as terrorists. Okay, but what happened was post 9/11, terrorist and militant insurgents, they got their own separate definitions. Okay, earlier they tend to overlap, and by terrorist today we generally mean Muslim or Islamic terrorists. Okay, like say if you read Indian papers, okay, especially Indian papers, you will see if there is some terror attack in or the insurgents of Northeast, the word they generally use, I'm not saying they never used word terrorist, but mostly it's militant or insurgents. Terrorist is a word which they will mostly use when it's like, say, we know that it's the perpetrator was a Muslim. So that's Sharjeel is here, and he can actually elaborate on this. He can speak for hours on this actually. So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. The second thing I told you, which I earlier flagged a bit, was there was this civil war which was going on. There was chaos in 90s in Afghanistan, and out of that chaos, Taliban emerged as a force to bring order. And that is why in the very initial months and weeks, they were welcomed in Afghanistan by local people, because wherever they want, see, by 90s, most of the middle class of Afghanistan had already left Afghanistan. Only people who had some political or business interest were there among rich, okay? Or they were these poor people. Anyone who got an opportunity to leave country could actually leave in 90s. So now what happened was Taliban brought order to these places, including in Kabul, okay? And many of these small towns, like I told you, they were being like at that time the word was they are being welcome. Now it's kind of back channel deals. So similar, what the kind of, they had these kind of deals where without actually fighting, they were taking over cities, okay? Similar deals happened at that time also in 90s. And by 96, they were in Kabul, okay? And there were these old government which was there, these warlords who had formed alliance government and fighting among themselves. This is what is came to be known as Northern Alliance. Now, why they are called Northern Alliance? Because they had in their control some of the provinces of Northern Alliance, of the North Afghanistan, primarily Badakhshan, Panjshir, Jawzjan, and some other provinces, not many, but they had some area. For a few years, even Mazar, okay, they had under Mazar. Now, whatever their ideology was, they were not terrorists, okay? They had a government in Afghanistan. They were running a government. Then 9/11 happened, and they were the US invasion, the NATO invasion, in fact, happened, okay? Now, there's this difference when we use the word invasion. Why I'm saying you can call it invasion? Because whether we like it or not, the invasion of Afghanistan was actually approved and sanctioned in United Nations, okay? Which was not the case with Iraq. So in international media also, very generically, everyone uses the word invasion for Iraq, but not always for US, okay? Whether we agree with the UN or whatever is a different matter, but this is the technical thing which is there. Now, Taliban had a government there. They were the ones who had the majority of the provinces under them, okay? And then once the invasion, this US bombing began, the Northern Alliance, so US was bombing from the air, and these Northern Alliance soldiers started coming back, okay? And Kabul, actually, not much fighting on ground happened. In many ways, what has happened now, in people who are old enough would remember, similarly, Taliban retreated at that time in 2001 end. No one expected the war at that time or the invasion to end so abruptly and so suddenly. The war ended, and for a short time, it seemed that US has won, okay? So much, US became so much confident that within 3 years, they invaded Iraq. The George Bush, in fact, he became so confident that, and all these neocons of the United States, they invaded Iraq. And this was another, if now you read analysis of what went wrong in Afghanistan, this was a major mistake which US made, was without actually stabilizing Afghanistan, they went to another country and bombed another country, okay? And killed again thousands of people in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq and other places. Now, what happened in Afghanistan was, now many of us Muslims who work on these issues of prosecutions of Muslims and all can understand it better, is on mere suspicion. So this is what the cycle, why I'm worried about Afghanistan, is because I told you that during communist regime, how there was prosecutions, and there are mass graves which are being discovered even now. We don't even know how many people died, okay? They died in lakhs, actually. And then similarly, once this government was formed, so earlier it was a transition government, interim government, where King Zahir Shah was the president and Karzai was made the prime minister. Karzai, by the way, is a Durrani Pashtun, okay, sub-tribe Karzai, and he was made the president. He was first made the prime minister, and then later president, and when the interim president, and then 2004 election happened after the Loya Jirga, and then he became president, and again in 2009 he won the second election. Okay, now what happened was, during this time, I have written this article, so I can maybe send the link. I will not go in all the details, but very briefly, because this is important for us to understand what is happening, is that indiscriminately Afghans police security forces, whichever force it is, okay, NDSF or police or army, there were night raids, okay. In fact, there were provinces where, like say Khost province, for example. So there was this special Khost province KPF, Khost Protection Force, okay, which was kind of a somewhere between, like we know Salwa Judum, right? So it was kind of a special force which didn't practically reported to the government, but to the US forces, which were the NATO forces which were there, okay, and they worked in trying to eliminate the suspected terrorists. There were night raids in Afghanistan in villages. There were bombing of the villages where they thought they had some intelligence inputs that there are some Taliban congregation. Now, many times it might have been a Taliban, but these Taliban were also not just coming and meeting. Okay, so it might be on the sidelines of some marriage. Someone in the village is getting married, and that's where they assembled. Or maybe it was there were wrong inputs, or maybe because it was night bombing, they by mistake bombed another village, okay, nearby village. So Taliban were in this village probably, and in the other village. So in short, what I'm saying is there was so much of indiscriminate bombing, arrest, harassment, persecutions of many of these especially rural people living in the eastern and southern provinces. Most of them happen to be Pashtuns, okay, and they were persecuted, and they felt really like angry. Just imagine a bomb is dropped at your home at night and 5 members of your family dies, okay, or 2 members of your family die. How would you react? Okay, this is what created a fertile ground for insurgency. And this is where Taliban regrouped around 2005-6. Taliban regrouped, okay, and of course they were supported by. It's not a hidden fact. And I'm not saying this because I'm Indian nationalist or anything, but it's a well-known, well-documented thing that they got tacit support from tacit and strategic and support from ISI, okay, from Pakistan, primarily through ISI. And there are, of course, other people also who support them. In last few years, in fact, it is well known that like in at least in intelligence circle and in academic circle, it is well known that Iran supports Taliban, okay, not just strategically but even financially. There are other countries. There are some elements within Taliban which were supported by US also, by the way. As Moin Bhai said, we will know things in maybe like in US, all these foreign papers are made public after, I think, 30 years, if I'm not wrong. So eventually we will all know about it. Like we know now that how US was involved in the Iraq-Iran war. So similarly, we will know it after a few years. But in short, this is what gave rise to the insurgency, okay? And Taliban regrouped themselves, and often their targets were all these, what they call the puppet government or their supporters, including media. But most of the people who died in most of these attacks were actually innocent people. So it's not that, so of course, to some degree, to a large degree, Taliban were insurgents. I'm not denying it, but they were not also like, it's not a holy war they are fighting, okay? It's like what they are doing is actually pure politics on the ground. They are fighting where many innocent people were dead, and they are like, generally some people, I'm not saying everyone, but some people have some kind of nostalgia when it comes to Taliban. Now people would say, why are you judging Taliban on parameters like these kind of things? Like say if I say that like there were these kind of reports that women have been asked to, like virgin women have been asked to be married to these Talib soldiers at the local level. Now many people say they question it, okay? They would, because you have some belief that Taliban are some God sent angels, okay? This is a fact which happens anywhere in the world, okay? We all know that wherever a war has happened, there have been some instances of rapes or some or other kind of persecution. Now I'm not saying there are evidences of rapes, okay, because there are some, like I heard about it. There are reports like this. I'm not saying it's confirmed that happened, but in Taliban case, what happened is they insist that maybe they will marry the girl, okay, forcibly. Now, again, we need to understand the Afghan society. When we say forcibly, that also is in itself, because many marriages in these, even in our country, happen forcibly, right? So even in Afghanistan, it's a rural area primarily, and most of these people were actually like very conservative, okay, they come from very conservative background. There is another thing which have been going on about this, their ideological belief and all. So being part of South Asia, most of the Afghans, like India and Pakistan, follow the Devandi fiqh, and they also are like followers of Sufism actually. In fact, one of the warlords, one of the important Mujahid leader, in fact, one of jihadi leader during early 90s was from the Jilani clan, okay, a Sufi like custodian of a dargah. So I'm just briefly mentioning about the politics which is happening there. Afghanistan is, of course, at the moment, what happened in past few days, you can only compare it with Game of Thrones or something if you don't know anyone. If you don't know anyone in Afghanistan, for students of politics, it seems like what is happening there. It's very intriguing what is happening there. But of course, people, what I want to say at the end is, it's people, end of the day, who are dying, whether they were communist supporters of communist or Mujahideen. They all were Afghans. Even Taliban, from President Karzai to even Ghani, always said, they never said that this is not part of Pakistan. So when I saw this trend about Taliban as proxy of Pakistan, which may be true to some extent, okay, but they are part of the Afghan society, okay, and they have the and they became legit. They were actually they had legitimate rights to power share in Afghanistan, because they were the ones who were ruling. And the day their office in Qatar was opened, okay, they became a legitimate. So in a way, indirectly, everyone recognized it without actually saying it. And when the US signed a deal, actually, where the word Taliban is not written, where the Islamic Emirate group is written, okay, so in a way, they also recognized it, okay. So I think with this, I will end. If there are some questions, then you can. If anyone has any question, then you can ask. I can see some in the chat box. I'll read maybe just a minute. Maybe meanwhile, if you have other questions, you can just pose your questions. Okay, so now I can read. Okay, so Arpita has asked that with the coming back of Taliban regime, the notion of Afghan women's right has been frequently discussed from various perspectives. Please share how you'll. So, Moin bhai, you want to say something on this? You can read the question.
So she wants to know about the Afghan women, security of Afghan women. See, it's definitely the people who have seen the last regime of Taliban of the 1990s, all those who have the memories of that period of time, they are extremely worried, because what they had seen at that time were horrible scenes. There is another thing in every war-torn societies, women are generally the extremely soft targets of the male-dominated conflicts. So there is one general problem, definitely it's there, and the particular problem is because of the past record of the Taliban. Although they have promised that women will be given their rights according to Sharia. Now that Sharia is a very debatable proposition, and parts of it have not been crystallized even in the last 1500 years or so. It has, it varies from school of jurisprudence, one school of jurisprudence to other, and societies, different societies to to one society to different societies. Even Sharia, where Muslims are living in minority, that is called fiqh al-aqliya. That is the jurisprudence of the minorities. Like, for example, somebody is living in the Scandinavian countries, so they have their own system on several Islamic laws. So definitely how Taliban understands Sharia, maybe they have spent these 20 years in understanding the evolution of Sharia better, or not. Only time will see, but only time will show us what happens. But as far as the concerns of women are concerned, they are genuine concerns. We cannot explain them that okay, everything will be all right, because Taliban has to prove, they have to prove that they have actually they are actually placing women to a more respectable position in what they had done in the past. This is what I have to say. Thank you.
Also, just to add to what Moin Bhai was saying, this is not to say that this is not a concern. This is a very important concern, but this is more of a concern for in urban areas, primarily in Kabul and these other towns, cities like Herat and to some extent in Mazar, okay, or maybe in Bamiyan also, okay. But all of us, maybe someone from America and Europe cannot understand it as well as we in India can understand. It's like, say, if a government is saying to wear hijab or to cover your face, there are many people, not just in our rural area, but even in our cities, many of our own uncles and fathers and who would say he is saying a good thing. आजकल की लड़कियां खराब हो गई है, or so to say, okay, or people are not dressing well and all those kind of things. So what I'm trying to say is many of the things which Taliban ask you to do, they often refer it to Sharia, on the basis of the Sharia, but it's also to do with Pashtunwali, okay, their own traditions of how they have lived historically. Also about Taliban, one more thing I missed was we also need to understand Taliban. These, as I said, they are war-hardened people. So most of these Taliban commanders are like, say, 25 years, 20 years, 28 years, 30 years. So that means they were born during the civil war, and all they have seen is fighting. Most of them, maybe someone or the other in their own family died, okay, and many of them maybe are orphans, okay. Most of them lived and were trained in madrasa or maktab from childhood, very basic education about Islam, okay, very like, say, what some of us study at the from our local Maulanas, okay, very basic level of Islam, and then all they have is arms in their own hands, okay. Also the kind of way they have been trained. I mentioned briefly that the CIA was the mastermind of this global jihad in late 80s and in 80s primarily, okay. During this global jihad, some of you might have seen on social media, they taught. So when we were young, how were we taught? 1, 2, 3 counting, 1 apple, 2 apple, 3 apple, or maybe balls, something like this. You can see books where one is actually one rifle or AK-47, 1, 2, 3, A for, or in Farsi or in Pashto, alif, alif for Allah, ba for bomb, okay, and so on. Or in English, maybe A for AK-47, okay, J for jihad or Jim for jihad. So that's how these Americans build this syllabus to teach. And in some of these madrasas on the border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, by madrasa I mean these maktabs, these small institutions which run, is still taught, okay. So this is the kind of background where these men have grown. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm not justifying what they are doing. I'm only trying to explain you where they come from, okay. And now I see there is one question on how do you think Indian government will negotiate with Taliban. Now, I particularly didn't touch upon this is because I think this is in itself a different topic, and we will maybe have another deliberation on this in the next session. But since you have asked, I think once international community recognizes the government in Kabul, which will officially not will be a, say, Taliban government. They want to have a more inclusive government. They have not yet declared government because they are in negotiating. And as Moin Bhai mentioned, even Ashraf Ghani's brother was seems to be on board. Okay, so the government they will declare probably will be more inclusive, at least in appearance. And once the international community recognizes it, I think India too will, and they will open channels of communications publicly. I say publicly because there have been some reports of back channel negotiation. But I think in the short run, this is not something I'm saying. Ambassador Kadzhu, who is an old hand in Afghanistan, said India has boxed itself in Afghanistan. Today, Syam Sharan has given an interview to Karan Thapar, and he has agreed that in the short run, India is on the back foot. Okay, so despite our investment, I think we are at the moment on the back foot. We as in India. But I feel that because India shares a lot of goodwill among common Afghans, so in years to come, things will be fine. And another thing which I'll say, when I was there in Kabul in 2019, some of these policy makers, they privately said, you know, I mentioned about these Duran line and all. So he said, you know, the nature of our politics is such, whoever is in Kabul cannot afford to be pro-Pakistan for a very long time. So for example, these Ahmad Shah Massoud and Rabbani and all these people were getting support from Pakistan. But once they came to government, they saw what Pakistan was up to, and they turned hostile to Pakistan. And naturally, then they started coming closer to India. So once Taliban is there and also in international relations or foreign policy, it's not a zero-sum game. Okay, it's not that one party, like either you are a friend or an enemy. You can be something between a friend and an enemy. That's what diplomacy is all about. Anyone else has any question? I see from Dr. Rashid Chaudhary, there is this question. Thank you, sir, for joining from Toronto early in the morning. So I'm reading the questions. To what extent will Afghanistan under the Taliban coordinate its domestic and foreign policy with Pakistan and especially ISI? Can we go so far to describe the new Afghanistan as a Pakistani protectorate? What chances of success do we have of the second resistance in Punjab? So there are basically two questions. The first part of your questions, which is like into like two questions, talks about Taliban-Pakistan relations. So as I just now mentioned, they have very close relations. The fact that after what happened on August 15, publicly Karzai and the former president and the chairman of the High Peace Council, Abdullah, publicly, the two of them met the Pakistan ambassador. So first foreign diplomat whom they met publicly was Pakistan's ambassador. Today only I saw a news report that I think Pakistan's foreign minister is tomorrow going to Afghanistan. So the first foreign minister to go even before government is announced. So probably to negotiate the government. So that's how the importance of Pakistan is there. It's not something like, I'm not going into conspiracy theory. It is there, which is there. We cannot deny this. And even Pakistan is not denying this. They are very happily doing this. The significance of what happened on 15th August. Okay, it was not a coincidence that day Kabul fell. Okay, I don't see it as a coincidence. I see it as pre-planned. Okay. So of course, in the short run, they have very good relations. Whether they will be reduced to a protectorate, I doubt. Afghans are not a people. Anyone who says that they will be reduced to a protectorate, probably you don't know Afghanistan that well. I'm not saying, Rashid Bhai, that you don't know. What I'm saying is that they will. Afghans are not so easy to be subdued. So I don't think it will happen. The second part of your question, the second resistance, I think it's a dead cause. Honestly, at the moment, the fact remains whether we like it or not. I remember on Saturday night or maybe Sunday, one professor from AMU messaged me that, Dr. Sahab, as Taliban is reaching Kabul, you are becoming softer on Taliban. So I said, no, I'm not becoming softer on Taliban, but it's a reality. You have to, whether we like Taliban or not, it's a fact that they have won Afghanistan. They struggled for 20 years and they have won it. Whether we like it or not, the credit is to them. and of course for all the follies which the government and the US forces have committed, but it's them who sustain the whatever you called it, insurgency or campaign or movement, whatever. They sustained it, they fought it, and they have got certain degree of legitimacy. They have, as I said, they have very good relation with some of these countries, Iran, even China. They just before, like just I think weeks before, Mullah Baradar was in, who is supposed to be the president, or I don't know what they will call him, Amir or president. He was in China. So yes, that's what. And so what in short I wanted to say is that the resistance, the so-called resistance from Panjshir, they will not get lot of international support. I don't think. Maybe some countries might covertly support them in the short run. I'm not saying Taliban have won and they are going to stay in Afghanistan forever, but in at least today, as of now, Taliban have won. They will form the kind of government they want to, but they want probably to have more inclusive government, at least the facade of it. I don't know how good their intent is, but they are speaking all the correct words. And many people say that Taliban has changed, but I think Afghanistan changed much more than Taliban. Probably even Taliban didn't expect women to be protesting. The first people to protest against Taliban were women, actually, in Kabul. Okay. So that's very significant. Now someone has written bas kar do, so I will end actually. So Madhuri Di has one question: why are local Afghans trying to flee to the US desperately? So most of the, I'll just say this, I've told to many people, just imagine there are these kind of rumors spreading in, especially in Kabul, is that people who are fleeing, whoever is fleeing, they will board the plane and they can go to America or wherever. Okay, just imagine if an announcement is made in Kolkata or in Delhi, okay, that there is a plane in, say, wherever, at Jantar Mantar, which will take everyone who boards the plane to United States or to Canada. Just think for a moment how the situation will be. Okay, so that's, I'm just saying this because you need to understand the people who are there. So the economy of Afghanistan is an unstable country, and the economy of Afghanistan is not in very good shape for decades. You don't know, like I'm walking on the street and there might be a blast and I die. Okay, so most Afghans, especially one who's like little like educated and want a better future, a secured future for their family, they would, even before August, even before 2020, okay, even in 2019, there were many people who would inquire if they want to seek asylum outside. Okay, so that's one part. The second part is most people who are trying to flee are educated middle class technocrats, people who have worked in the media, people who have worked in international NGOs, people who have worked as translators, and there were huge number of translators. Okay, you can't even, because these American soldiers and all these contract workers, people who have worked in on contract for American agencies or international agencies. Okay, and people, most importantly, people who have worked in the government. Some of my friends who were advisor to the minister, or they are young MPs, they are all fleeing. So the first Air India flight which came to Delhi, I think on 15th evening, right? In that flight, if you see, most of the people, most of the Afghans were young MPs, young and old MPs, and politicians and journalists and NGO workers, all those people. So the situation is such that people are running from, trying to flee from there for secured future. By the way, Taliban is saying very good things, but their local commanders are not always. So there's this mismatch of what Taliban leaders are saying to what, say, happening on the ground. And we in India can understand it better is from what Bhagwat ji says that Hindus and Muslims have same DNA. Modi ji says that sabka saath, sabka viswas, and but what happens on the ground, you know. And these local commanders who have some grudge against, say, local police chief, why would he listen to today he has got an opportunity. By the way, to put in perspective, when civil war happens, when a coup happens, when a revolution happens, again, this is not to justify, but I'm just putting it in perspective, that targeted killings of your rivals have happened always in history, okay, when these kind of coups happen. Okay, my question is, considering the trade route of Arabian Sea, there is a possibility of India might have some resistance in availing the Chabahar port. So, is India really serious? This is again a separate topic, but is India really serious about Chabahar? Forget about what happened in August. India itself has not really been very serious about. So India has actually did not have very positive outcome from, say, relation in what is happening in Afghanistan and Iran. And it is not just because what happened in the month of August. It has been piling up, but we will take up these issues in a separate session maybe. It's like almost more than almost 2 hours or so. I think there are no more questions. Is there any other question, or else I think I will end it up. I think there is no more questions. So I think with this we can end it up, end it here. And if people are interested, maybe next session we will have on just India-Afghan relations, or the impact of the new government in the region. Okay, so I think, so I'm ending this. Moin bhai, you want to add something? Maybe sum up or something, a concluding remark?
No, I just want to thank and just remind people that all those who have dreams to go to US or Canada, the latest flight of the people who wanted to go to US have been dumped in UAE.
UAE
So
and
there,
Qatar also, I think.
yeah. So there's a lot going to happen, and some regional backlashes will also happen. It's not going to be very easy for the Afghans living in even the so-called Muslim countries. So the challenge is there for the Afghan people, and I really hope and pray that the nation really comes together and start living peacefully. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Riaz. Thank you.
And before we end, I must thank Diya Di, Dr. Diya Bose. She's been like, I was thinking how to do it. And she was kind enough to actually offer her Zoom account and set up this event. So I must really publicly acknowledge her support. She's been there all through, but more importantly, she offered to do it, because I wanted to do it in Zoom, and she offered it to her own account. So I'm really thankful to her for providing this. And she's actually traveling, but from her hotel room she has actually logged in. So I'm really thankful to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, this was my pleasure. I'm so glad that I was able to assist you, and this was an amazing presentation. So I'm looking forward to future talks.
Thank you so much. So then I'll stop recording and then I will end this.